welcome once more to Alpha Found. It would be an unsound fancy and self-contradictory to expect that things which have never yet been done can be done except by means which have never yet been tried. Finally we arrive. The volatility effect has remained mysterious despite the many attempts to explain it. Higher moment models, multifactor models, and the consequences of unrealistic assumptions have been examined in the literature for over 50 years to the point of exhaustion. Although these methods have provided numerous insights, at the end of the day they don't really capture what we're looking for, which is a clear quantitative relationship. After looking at the data analysis in the last video, I suggested that since the effect was obvious, the cause must be obvious also. Yet, it is not obvious. The new approach, which will be introduced momentarily, I believe will not look promising at first. For that matter, I don't think it will look promising even after this and the next video. However, the harder we push on it, the more promising it will become. We have to go slowly. There will not be much progress in this video. The key is to separate the market returns into two pieces, such that for a single time period the return is broken up in this manner, or like this as an average over time. The return of the market is easily measured, but what are the two pieces, and what are the subscripts? I think the best way to do this is to put the two pieces at the heads of two columns and then give the names that have historically been given to each piece. My apologies for being a little loose with the terminology. Many of the descriptive terms were meant to apply to things other than aggregate equity market returns, and I don't want to try to make others responsible for my thinking or suggest that their ideas are the same as my ideas, but this should give the flavor of it. Here we go. Benjamin Graham and Warren Buffett referred to R sub M as fundamental analysis and R sub PM as Mr. Market. They also called R sub M a weighing machine and R sub PM a voting machine. John Maynard Keynes referred to R sub M as economic expectation and R sub PM as animal spirits. Paul Samuelson called R sub M signal and R sub PM red noise. Burton Malkiel referred to the pieces as firm foundation versus castles in the air. Alan Greenspan and Robert Shiller refer to the pieces as fundamental analysis and irrational exuberance. Robert Shiller, without Alan Greenspan, referred to R sub M as fundamentals and R sub PM as excess volatility. Richard Roll referred to R sub M as the return generator G. He did not have a term for R sub PM that I know of. You can see that several prominent figures in the history of investing have commented on the two pieces, or at least commented on something like the two pieces. As a clarification about G, Richard Roll described G this way. G is not a portfolio. Instead, G is the unique source of common variation in the ensemble of asset returns. This seemingly innocuous distinction is actually critical. This list is not complete, nor is it precise. I could add more with the contributions of Nobel Prize winners Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler, along with others. The point is simply to give the flavor of the two pieces. But just to give a few verbal encouragements to the ideas, I have a few quotations for you to consider. The first is by Irving Fisher, who was once described as the greatest economist the United States has ever produced. He said, "Were it true that each individual speculator made up his mind independently of every other as to the future course of events, the errors of some would probably be offset by the errors of others. But as a matter of fact, the mistakes of the common herd are usually in the same direction. Like sheep, they follow a single leader." The second quotation comes from Jules-Henri Poincaré, who has been called the Gauss of modern mathematics. He also was the thesis advisor for Louis Bachelier. He said, "When men are brought together, they no longer decide at random and independently one of another. They influence one another. Multiplex causes come into action. They worry men, dragging them right or left. But one thing there is they cannot destroy, is their pan-urge flock of sheep habits, and this is an invariant." Finally, we have Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve for 19 years. But how do we know when irrational exuberance has unduly escalated asset values, which then become subject to unexpected and prolonged contractions as they have in Japan over the past decade? And how do we factor that assessment into monetary policy? Back to the model. In some ways, to label the pieces is also to libel them, thus prejudging them. So rather than borrow from the list just presented, I will use the following definitions. R prime sub mt is the total return of the market in period t. R sub mt without the prime is the ideal return of the market in period t. And R sub pmt is the perturbation return of the market in period t. The definition of a perturbation is as follows. A disturbance of motion, course, arrangement, or state of equilibrium. A disturbance of the regular and usually elliptical course of motion of a celestial body that is produced by some force additional to that which causes its regular motion. I'm going to use the terms ideal return and perturbation return, and correspondingly ideal systematic risk and perturbation risk. There could be reasons for perturbation returns that are not behavioral or relating to agency issues, like anticipation of a trend, or economic forecast errors resulting from misjudgment, or unexpected events, or something else no one has thought of. The key is this: perturbation returns have an expected return of 0 for the entire market in each time period and across time. The sum of market perturbations over time approach 0 since they are assumed to be governed by a mean reverting process. I am calling the new model the perturbation risk model, or PRM. If the perturbation returns equal 0 in a given time period, then the market return is equal to the ideal return plus the perturbation return, and since the perturbation return is 0, all we have is the ideal return, which is equal to the market return. Therefore, if the perturbations are 0 in each time period, then the model reverts back to CAPM and we are in the same place we started. If the perturbations are approximately 0 in each time period, then the model is only trivially different from CAPM. If the perturbation returns are economically or statistically significant, then the model is economically or statistically significantly different from CAPM. Since the expected perturbation in each period is 0, and the process is mean reverting, then over time the average perturbation return is close to 0, though it is not necessarily or even likely to be 0 at any point along the way. Now is a good time to mention that perturbation risk is not the same as idiosyncratic risk. This is covered in the next video and in several other videos. If we assume for the moment that the perturbation risk model is correct, then 3 conclusions follow without further analysis. 1. There are 2 sources of return for the market in the next time period, ideal return and perturbation return. 2. There is only one source of market return in the long run, ideal return. And 3. Ordinary least squares regression will not work as an estimation process. By the time this series of videos is over, it will be clear that what we have seen so far is sufficient to make the volatility effect a mathematical expectation. But we're a long way from that. Since I would expect no one to believe this without sufficient evidence, the rest of the videos spell out the details.